They told me to mop the buffet line just as taps started playing from the chapel next door. Name's Loyal Benning, 65, retired logistics officer, apparently also qualified for lunchroom cleanup. When I stood up, my old field badge hit the tile with a sound no one could laugh at. Ever had your past sneak up on you? In front of everyone, I didn't mind the mop. There's something honest about moving dirty water from one place to another. You can see your work when you're done. You don't get emails about it 3 weeks later. No one asks for a report on whether the floor feels strategically cleaner. It just is or it isn't. And for a man like me, there's comfort in that. The mess hall at Fort Harper hadn't changed much since the last time I stood here with stripes on my shoulder. Same scuffed corners near the bulkhead doors. Same squeaky hinge on the ice machine that no one ever greased properly. Even the clock above the serving line still lagged 4 minutes behind reality. I could have fixed it years ago. Chose not to. Something about watching time run a little slower in a place like this felt fair. I pushed the mop bucket past a cluster of line cooks arguing over gravy temperature. Nobody looked up. That was the arrangement. I wore the brown apron, kept my head down, and didn't speak unless someone spilled something or asked where the dry towels were. In return, I got paid just enough to cover a small trailer outside Tupelo, and wasn't asked any questions about my past. It was a good deal, really. Until Tuesday. They told me to mop under the buffet line right in the middle of the lunch rush. It was 11:47 a.m. The room buzzed like a hive. Boots squeaked against tile trays, clattered radios hummed low and indecipherable from the kitchen's back corner. A platoon had just returned from field drills, mud still drying on their cuffs. Young men and women mostly. Shoulders tight, eyes that hadn't yet figured out what to look for. I moved toward the line with my mop in hand, nodding silently to Captain Redmond as he stood beside the sneeze guard clipboard in hand overseeing compliance. He didn't return the nod, just scribbled something and kept watching. I bent at the waist, reached under the hot tray cart to catch a strip of spilled barbecue sauce. That's when I heard it. The sound wasn't loud, not in the traditional sense. But in a room full of forced laughter and metal clatter, the click of brass on tile sliced through everything. It bounced once, twice, then stopped near the foot of a private first class who was balancing a tray of mashed potatoes and whatever else they called meat that day. I froze. So did the private. So did Redmond. I didn't look down. I knew exactly what it was. My fingers had brushed the edge of that little box in my side pocket earlier when I pulled out a hand towel. I'd forgotten to button the flap. Rookie mistake. 40 years in uniform and somehow I'd still forgotten the damn flap. The private leaned, slightly squinting. Was that a general's pin? He said, too loud voice cracking halfway. No one answered him. Captain Redmond's eyes hadn't left the floor. He was staring at the Insignia like it might detonate. I stood up slowly, mop dripping behind me. The tile beneath my boots had a faint shimmer from the wax. The badge, my old field badge from Benning Field Command, sat in the middle of it, bent on one edge, tarnished slightly. The black engraving had faded after all those years in the Gulf heat, but the star was still clear, still mine. I didn't pick it up. I turned, walked toward the back door, and left it there. Someone called out behind me, "Sir." But the voice hesitated, didn't finish, didn't insist. I heard the word hang there half-born like the last note of a bugle echoing through morning fog. And then it was gone. Out behind the mess hall, the air smelled like burnt fryer oil and early spring. The magnolias were blooming along the fence line. I stood there for a while watching the trees not move. Mississippi air likes to sit heavy sometimes, like it knows things but won't say. The door behind me creaked open. A kid, Private Langley. Maybe I couldn't keep the name straight, stepped out, shifting awkwardly. He cleared his throat. "Excuse me, are you... were you Benningfield?" I turned slowly. His eyes weren't mocking. They weren't reverent either. Just searching. That kind of searching they teach out west in schools that don't believe in reverence anymore. I didn't answer. Just looked past him toward the tree line. "I had an uncle stationed there," he said quietly. "Before they... you know." I nodded. That was enough. He stepped back inside. I stayed out a while longer, listening to the air. The hallway to the basement storage always smelled like wet cardboard and cold dust. Not mold, exactly. Just time pressed too tightly in a space that hadn't been opened in years. Some doors at Fort Harper never got used unless something went wrong, or someone came back when they weren't supposed to. The floor creaked on the left fourth tile from the wall. Still did. I stepped around it out of habit, like muscle memory that had outlived its purpose. Staff Sergeant Ward grumbled as he twisted the brass key into the oversized lock. "What are you even hoping to find in here, Benning? Old coffee filters and moldy inspection tags?" I gave him a small shrug. "Closure." "Closure," he laughed, pushing the door open with a wheeze. "That's some new kind of bleach," I didn't answer. He let the door fall shut behind me, muttering something about ghost hunting and how people needed hobbies. The room was dim. The single light overhead flickered once, then stabilized into a dull amber glow. Rows of metal shelves lined the walls, filled with boxes in various stages of collapse. Labels written in marker had faded into anonymity. Some shelves still bore grease prints from the old requisition days. But it was the chair I noticed first. Soot's chair. Left exactly where he used to sit, back corner near the vent that whined when the HVAC overcorrected. And just like I expected, he was there. Not in the chair. Standing beside it. Elbows tucked in clipboard under his left arm and a fresh roll of tobacco between his fingers. The smoke curled toward the light and vanished before touching the bulb. "You always knock like a ghost," he said, voice soft, like wood worn smooth. I nodded. "Didn't think you'd still be down here." Soot smiled, thin and quiet. "Didn't think you would." We didn't hug. That wasn't our kind of friendship. But I nodded once and he nodded back, and that was more honest than most reunions I'd seen in my life. "I'm looking for funding trails," I said. "Something from 17 to 19. Soot raised an eyebrow, not asking why just when. He reached for a stepladder and gestured toward the third shelf, second row. Top corner marked Non-Compliant, 2017. "It's dusty. Don't get sentimental about how we stored things back then." I climbed. The box was heavier than I expected. Tape peeling edges soft from moisture. When I opened the lid, a small puff of mildew escaped like a sigh. Inside folders, old procurement forms, checklists in triplicate. And near the bottom, a folded invoice with my name. Loyal Benning, spelled with the extra L. My stomach tensed. Authorized by Benning, the invoice read, printed in faint thermal ink, half faded by time. It was for a batch of industrial stoves, 4 units model MTech 760, routed to a facility listed as Civic Wing, McKelvey Foundation. I didn't remember signing anything for that. Not during that year. Especially not for McKelvey anything. I handed it down to Soot. He adjusted his glasses and held the paper to the light. "Looks like someone ran it through an old receipt printer. Thermal heads degrading. Probably to make it look aged." He flipped to the back. "White out," he murmured, rubbing a thumb over the faint sheen. but the pressure indentation's still here. See this dip? He angled it so I could see the ghost of a date backdated 6 months earlier than the authorization stamp. This ain't sloppy paperwork, he said. This is ghost fraud. That's when I felt it. Not anger. Not yet. Something colder. Familiar. Like the chill in the air when your gut knows the mission's off before anyone says it out loud. We dug further. In another folder labeled Discretionary Expense, Fort Harper. We found a secondary ledger, a typed spreadsheet, printed and then scanned back in, as if someone wanted it to look digital without being traceable. It listed payouts to a vendor called Civic Cross Solutions, with routing numbers ending in 881. Same trail as the McKelvey Foundation. One line near the bottom caught my eye. Auth code Ben36FN, Field Ops, Deferred Maintenance Allocation. I hadn't seen that code since Kandahar. It was mine, burned into my deployment records. I hadn't used it since 2015, and even then only on encrypted procurement. Where'd you find this box? I asked, voice low. Soot leaned against the shelf. Came in during a reorg when Hallie's dad started rerouting logistics. Was supposed to be shredded. I kept it. Something smelled off. I nodded slowly. In the corner of the room, the vent rattled to life. Neither of us spoke. Then I spotted it tucked between two faded folders, a battered field logbook. Flipcover green, pages yellowed, edges curled. My handwriting. But the date on the front, May 2018. I was stationed overseas that month. Full blackout window. I hadn't set foot in the States for 10 weeks. My fingers closed around the book like it might disappear if I blinked. I flipped to the signature line. There it was, L. Benning, in a hand that almost matched mine. But the pressure was wrong. No drag. No slip at the descender. Just clean strokes like a copy rendered with a digital pen. I didn't speak. Soot looked at me. You ready to pull this thread all the way? She walked in like she owned the scent of hot biscuits and reheated chili. And maybe she did for now. Hallie June McKelvey had the kind of entrance that made the air bend. Not loud, not dramatic, just certain. Like the morning fog that rolls over the drill field without asking permission. She wore a pressed navy blazer that probably cost more than the entire kitchen's monthly supply order. Latte in hand. No lid. No fear of spillage. The woman had either perfect wrists or perfect arrogance. Maybe both. It was 11:30 on the dot, and the canteen was already humming with the lunch crowd. Sporks tapping on trays, the scent of cornbread battling with over-salted beans. Gospel music played low from the corner speaker, someone's phone plugged into the aux with a cord that had seen better days. A woman's voice crooned about climbing Jacob's ladder, but her conviction competed with the hiss of mashed potatoes being scooped under heat lamps. Hallie stopped by the laminated regulations reminder chart posted beside the cutlery tray. Whose idea was this font, she said to no one in particular. It looks like a retirement card threw up. One of the line cooks laughed nervously. Another adjusted his gloves, eyes down. She moved along the line, pointing with the tip of her latte cup. That sneeze guard needs buffing. And the gloves, do we not have nitrile this week? I specifically requested no powdered latex. No one answered. To her credit, or her calculation, she didn't seem to care. Two privates from logistics training passed her on their way to the exit. One of them, a gangly kid with regulation buzz and nervous hands, snapped off a salute. Too early. Uncalled for. She wasn't in uniform. Just an administrator. Hallie didn't acknowledge it. She didn't break stride. just walked through the gesture like it was a warm breeze that didn't concern her. I stood near the mop station, feigning interest in a rag that didn't need wringing. She hadn't noticed me yet. That was fine. I preferred watching people before they decided how to see me. Her voice carried as she addressed the assistant cook. Sanitation logs need to be filed daily, not weekly. And remove those quote cards. Motivation isn't a condiment. Then she disappeared into the office. The door swung shut with a soft hiss. The gospel music skipped once and resumed. I walked back toward the locker corridor, past a metal rack stacked with flour sacks. My own locker sat where it always had third, from the end dent in the door, from a boot I didn't remember kicking. Inside, under a pair of folded gloves and a plastic bag holding half a pack of mints, was a tin box. I pulled it out. Small, square, dark green with brass trim. The kind of box that might hold loose screws or war medals depending on whose life it belonged to. Mine held one thing. My badge. Brigade Field Badge. Bent slightly on the left prong where I'd dropped it during a sandstorm in Oterm 9. Gleamed faintly even in this weak fluorescent light. Not polished. Just clean. Still carried the dirt of use in the tiny ridges where the star's edges rose. I didn't take it out often. Not because I was ashamed. Because it was mine. And some things, when shown too early, lose weight. That's what I told the private who noticed it. He must have come in to restock paper towels or dodge a supervisor. Either way, he caught me mid-look. Badge in hand. Tin open. He froze. Sir? Sorry. I didn't mean to interrupt. I shook my head. He hesitated, staring at the insignia. That's a Benning badge, right? I nodded. He bit his lip. Why'd you hide this? I placed the badge back in the tin. Because some things I said, locking eyes with him, lose weight when displayed too early. He nodded like he understood. Maybe he did. Maybe not. But he left quietly. After he was gone, I sat on the bench in front of the locker and let the memory rise, slow and thick, like steam off an old stovetop. The last time the badge was pinned to me, retirement ceremony. No parade. Just a folding chair, a few old colleagues who came more out of habit than sentiment. One of them, Major Tinsley, handed me the box with a look I couldn't read. You earned this, he'd said, but they won't give you the rest. I hadn't asked what the rest meant. That was the kind of man I used to be, one who let other people finish sentences however they wanted. I rubbed my thumb along the dent in the badge and slipped it back into the tin. Snapped it shut. That's when my phone buzzed. A text from Soot. Image attachment. Grainy. Poor lighting. A photocopied finance form with names highlighted in yellow. Under secondary authorization, Civic Logistics Fund 2018. 2 names stood out. One was mine. The other, Hallie June McKelvey. I stared at the screen. No context, no commentary, just the image and a timestamp. I looked toward the office door where Hallie had vanished 15 minutes earlier, and suddenly her blazer felt more like armor. The meeting room smelled like old toner and fried chicken grease. The AC was out again. 3rd time that month. A plastic fan in the corner clicked every 3rd rotation like it had a secret to tell but didn't know how. Half the blinds were missing slats and someone had pushed 2 chairs together in the back to make a sad sort of love seat that no one ever sat in. Hallie stood at the front, marker in hand, gesturing at a flowchart on laminated paper that made less and less sense the longer you looked at it. So if we consolidate the prep and plating stages under a unified hot-hold model, she said, tapping her marker twice, we can shave 6 minutes off the cycle time for high-volume trays. That's a 14% reduction in dish lag, assuming compliance. Captain Redmond nodded, one leg crossed over the other, notebook unopened on his lap. Soot sat with arms folded, chewing an unlit roll of tobacco, and blinking so slowly it might have been Morse code for, "This is a waste of oxygen." I sat at the end of the table, nearest the window, second chair from the left. I'd placed the tin box in front of me, not front and center, just there. Lid closed, dust wiped clean. I hadn't meant to make a show of it, but I hadn't meant to hide it either. Hallie caught sight of it mid-sentence. She stopped, tilted her head slightly as if reading the label on a soup can. Then she reached across the table and lifted the lid without asking. She held the badge between two fingers. Light from the overhead fluorescence bounced off its edge just enough to catch the dull glint of brass rubbed thin over time. She smiled. "That's cute," she said. From one of those cereal boxes, behind her, a recruit froze mid-swipe of a dish tray. The joke didn't land. She kept going. "Looks like something my grandfather used to collect, what do you call them, challenge coins." She laughed to herself. "I think he kept them in a shot glass." She set it down, didn't align it with the tin, just let it fall. A small clatter on the laminate table, a badge half spun and then stilled, leaving a faint arc in the dust. No one spoke. Not Redmond, not Soot. I reached forward, slowly, picked up the badge and held it for a breath, then gently placed it back in the tin, snapped the lid shut. "Some metals rust," I said, not looking at anyone. "Some just wait." Hallie blinked, then laughed again, softer now. "Well, that's poetic." The meeting resumed. Something about supply vendors and budget forecasts. I don't remember much of what followed. The badge sat inside its tin, warm in my pocket, heavier than it had felt in years. Afterward, as I made my way toward the hall, Redmond caught up with me near the vending machines. He looked around, then leaned in, voice low. "Her signature," he said, "shows up on more than budget drafts." Then he walked off, didn't wait for a reply. The hallway fan sputtered again behind me, coughing out the last of its borrowed air. They called it the budget compliance room, but it felt more like the kind of place you'd sit in before learning a family secret. Beige walls, no art, just a clock that ticked like it was daring someone to interrupt it. The long table had a ring-shaped stain in the center, where someone had once set a carafe too hot for laminate. The screen at the far end flickered every 20 seconds, a soft pulse that made each spreadsheet feel like a warning, blinking in Morse. I took the second seat from the left, same side as the exit, not out of fear, just habit. Soot sat beside me, back straight, notebook unopened. He didn't bring his usual clipboard, just a manila envelope, edges frayed. Captain Redmond leaned against the credenza, arms folded, eyes unreadable. He wasn't here as an officer today, just a witness. Across from us, Hallie June McKelvey scrolled through her phone until counsel arrived. Ms. Carver, legal liaison, carried herself like she'd rather be anywhere else. She wore sensible shoes and a face that had seen more petty theft than moral crisis. Reverend Fife came in last, still wearing his chaplain pin, though no one had asked him to. He nodded once at me and took the seat at the end of the table, hands folded, no Bible in sight. The room settled. I reached into the folder I'd brought and pulled out a single page. Then I read. 4 procurement records, 4 separate purchase orders, all signed L. Benning. All dated between September 2017 and June 2019, all during my deployment abroad. I read each aloud, not fast, not slow, just steady, like inventory, like truth. Soot followed by placing his envelope on the table and sliding out the contents, 3 layers of paper for each purchase. Originals with timestamp watermarks, copies with whiteout trails, and a shadow receipt on carbon that still held the faint pressure of a different signature underneath. He didn't explain them. He didn't need to. Hallie broke the silence with a laugh that tried too hard. "This is a misunderstanding," she said, waving a manicured hand. "If anything, it's just misfiled oversight. I mean, who still uses carbon paper?" Redmond pulled a tablet from his sleeve and tapped it once. On screen, a scan appeared: fund dispersal logs, a highlighted name. Secondary beneficiary authorization, McKelvey H.J. She looked at the screen, lips tight. "I didn't write that." "No," I said. "You typed it." She opened her mouth, closed it, then opened it again. "This place is drowning in bad documentation. If we're going to drag names over paperwork, then start with mine," I said flatly. Everyone turned. I reached into my jacket, pulled out the tin box, opened it, took out the badge. It didn't shine much anymore, but it didn't need to. I placed it in the center of the table, right on top of the laminate stain. This used to mean something. No one moved. No one breathed too loud. Reverend Fife leaned forward, voice calm. "You're not just feeding troops here," he said quietly, eyes on Hallie. "You're feeding how this place remembers itself." The projector clicked again. Another flicker. Another spreadsheet. The silence after felt thick enough to scoop with a ladle. I didn't expect him to walk in. But Darius McKelvey always had a way of showing up when optics mattered most. The door didn't creak. The hinges had been oiled recently. Someone cared about the impression that small sounds make. He entered like a shadow with keys. No tie, no salute, just presence. A leather folder in his hand, unreadable eyes, suit slightly wrinkled in the way that hinted he'd been sitting in a car too long, thinking too hard. He didn't look at Hallie, didn't speak to Redmond, or Soot, or me. He walked straight to the table and stared at the badge, still sitting there, still center stage. The quiet didn't feel earned anymore. It felt loaded. Burnt coffee lingered in the corners of the room, the kind that had sat too long on the burner, bitter and empty. One window had been cracked open since the earlier meeting. It let in more humidity than air. I watched Darius watching the badge. He set the folder down, opened it, slid out a printed audio memo transcript. "October 2019, he said, voice flat. "My office. Internal procurement call." Redmond leaned forward slightly. "Miss." Carver hadn't returned, probably at legal's main office, drafting a storm. Darius tapped the sheet. "Memo captured by our internal dictation AI. Phrase of interest, she's in the field. She trusts me." He looked at me then. Not defensive, not sorry. Just present. She was Hallie. I knew it. He didn't have to say it. No one did. Across the table, Hallie didn't move. Her fingers clenched at her blazer hem, then released. Her breath came short, caught once on the inhale. She stood. But didn't speak, didn't explain, didn't deny. Just stood there like a flag that had slipped off its pole. I didn't yell, didn't raise my voice. That was never my style. I nodded. Just once. Darius saw it. He reached out, not fast, not ceremonially, and touched the badge. His fingers brushed its edge like he was testing if it would bite. Then, with surprising care, he picked it up, turned it over, and placed it back into the tin box. Closed the lid gently. The badge didn't clink this time. It simply settled. Soot didn't blink. Redmond's jaw was set, but his voice was calm. "This room calls for a freeze," Redmond said. "Effective immediately. Hallie's program is suspended pending external audit." Silence. Reverend Fife, who'd returned at some point I hadn't noticed, spoke next. "Restitution fund will be created for misallocated food service grants. Names will be redacted until findings are final." Hallie said nothing. Her face held no tears, no fury, just a slow collapse inward like drywall when the studs rot. She left without asking. No one stopped her. Darius looked at me once more. "I never thought you'd come back here," he said, quiet. "Not like this." I met his eyes. "Neither did you." 2 months later, the smell of bleach had been replaced by biscuits. That felt like justice. Not the dramatic kind. Not the kind you read about in verdicts or see played out in courtroom dramas. Just the quiet justice of clean tiles and warm food. The kind of justice you can smell before you can name. The mess hall had been gutted, scrubbed, rebuilt. The plastic bulletin boards were gone, replaced with wooden slats made by local carpenters. The steel trays had been upgraded, and someone had finally fixed the uneven drain by the dish station. On the far wall where the old microwave used to hum its last breath now hung a sign, "Benning Field Vocational Wing." The letters were carved, not printed. Slightly crooked. Honest. Reverend Fife stood at the front microphone, too tall for him, but he didn't adjust it. Just lifted his chin. "Honor," he said, "isn't what others see when they look. It's what survives even when no one's watching." I stood near the back. Didn't need a seat. Didn't need a spotlight. Soot was in rare form, laughing with a group of new trainees, most of them younger than his old army boots. One had a tattoo fresh enough that the wrap was still visible under his rolled sleeve. Another kept glancing toward the ovens like they might bite. But they were present. And for some of them, that was the bravest thing they'd done in years. The program was simple: teach kitchen and logistics skills to ex-service and unemployed locals. Rotate them through prep, inventory, basic finance, even supply chain software. Not glamorous, but sustainable. The funding had come quietly. Hallie wasn't here. No one expected her to be. But after the speeches, Soot approached me with a grin that felt like sunlight filtered through a screen door. "Got something," he said, handing me the tin box. I hadn't seen it in weeks. It felt heavier. Inside was the badge, polished, gleaming, but not new. Just whole. Beneath it, a folded note. Not typed, not formal. Just 5 lines handwritten in Hallie's sharp but slightly rushed script. "I didn't come to ask forgiveness. That would have been too easy. I just stepped aside so your name could finally breathe. HJM." I didn't smile, but I didn't frown either. I looked up. Near the front, one of the trainees dropped a plate. It didn't shatter. Someone had mended the crack with gold glue, kintsugi, the old Japanese method. Breakage is part of history, not something to hide. I walked to the display case. Wooden, modest, glass, not expensive. I placed the tin box inside and locked it. The label read, "Legacy Not for Sale." The wind hit the shutters hard that morning. Nothing broke, but something loosened inside. The cabin creaked once like a man stretching after too long sitting still. I didn't move right away. The coffee hadn't finished percolating, and the stovetop still clicked like it couldn't quite remember what ignite meant. I kept the room dark save for the thin line of gold trying to edge its way under the back door. I'd been meaning to fix that door, but some things are better when they don't shut all the way. On the wall, a faded blueprint of Fort Harper hung beneath a horseshoe nail. The paper had curled with age. I'd pinned it there not to remember the base, but to remember the corners no one saw. The loading dock shadow, the water line near the staff lockers, the section where they kept the backup records marked in pencil, erased and redrawn so many times the paper had thinned. The badge sat on a shelf now, not in a box, not hidden. Framed under cheap glass backed with oak, no plaque underneath, no explanation. Whoever walked in, if they asked, I'd tell them what it used to mean. But they'd have to ask. I stirred varnish with a stick from the kindling box. My hands smelled of pine resin and turpentine. The stovetop had finally sputtered to life, its center burner glowing orange like it was embarrassed to be so hot. I tightened the last bolt on the side panel, let the heat run for a while. The tools stayed where they were. Some jobs don't require cleanup until later. The landline rang once, then cut. I let it go. The answering machine clicked. Reverend Fife's voice crackled out warm as always, just slightly out of tune, like a vinyl record played too slow. "They're putting your name on the wall," he said. "Didn't ask for permission, figured we'd just tell you. Echo Unit front entrance. Redmond's idea, actually. Thought you should know." Click. I poured coffee into the mug with the chip on the handle. Not my only mug. Just my favorite. The wind had settled some. A moth knocked softly against the porch screen, batting one dusty wing against the light bulb that never quite died. The phone beeped again. This time a voicemail. Hallie's voice tentative but clear. "I'm in Oregon. Don't know if this number still works. No interviews. Just learning to cook for real. There's a guy here who said I peel potatoes like I've never been in a kitchen. He's not wrong." She exhaled through her nose. I could hear it. "I'm not sending another letter. One was enough." Click. I sat for a while. Didn't move. Didn't drink the coffee yet. Eventually I opened the tin again. It still lived in the drawer beneath the blueprint, tucked between my deployment oath and a folded field manual from 2003. Inside, the badge still held its weight. Still had the nick on the left edge from where it once scraped a locker hinge in Kuwait. I lifted the oath out a single page, yellowed my name written in pen, not type. I laid it beside the badge, then burned the photo. The last photo of my resignation letter crumpled in a steel ashtray. Flame took the edges first, curling the corners like shame leaving quietly. I carried it outside, watched the last smoke vanish into the pine trees. No fireworks. No vindication. Just space, just breath. I sat on the porch. The kettle squeaked behind me. A moth circled the screen again. And softly, not to anyone in particular, I said, "You used my name. I rebuilt it." Letter by letter, still standing. The old badge sits quietly behind glass, now beside the oath I once took with steadier hands. This morning the porch smelled of pine and burnt coffee, and for the first time in a long while I didn't mind the silence. Turns out, you don't have to clear your name with noise, just with presence and a little persistence. Sometimes what breaks in us isn't lost, it's waiting to be rebuilt with care. And if you've ever been overlooked, outvoted, or misnamed, take heart, dignity doesn't expire. What part of your story still deserves to be framed, not forgotten? Feel free to share it below or just nod quietly. That counts too.